This week, North Korea's Un talks peace with South Korea's Moon. Up next is a face-to-face with Donald Trump. Is this something new or just deja vu? China. How will 400 million millennials change the communist country in the years ahead? And acid attack in Pakistan. This time a Christian woman is dead. These stories and more. And it's all right here, right now from the Global Lane. South Korean President Moon Jae-in is talking peace with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Will the 65-year state of war finally end between the two countries? Donald Trump's historic meeting with Un is set to take place in late May or June. Might his efforts lead to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and maybe a Nobel Peace Prize?
We've been very, very tough at the border. Sanctions have been the toughest we've ever imposed on any country. And we think it'll be a great thing for North Korea, and it'll be a great thing for the world. So we'll see where that all goes. Maybe it'll be wonderful, and maybe it won't. And if it's not going to be fair and reasonable and good, I will, unlike past administrations, I will leave the table.
Well, joining us is American University Paris professor Hall Gardner. He's author of the book World War Trump. Now, that planned one-on-one meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un could be a huge success. What does that meeting, something that no other president has arranged, by the way, say about Trump's strategy?
Well, I actually think that's a brilliant move on Trump's part. I actually said that in the book. He could probably go on and meet with Kim. The problem is it has to be planned ahead of time. Normally, when the president goes, it's after a deal's made with the State Department's met with the opposing side, and they've worked out the strategy and the format of the peace negotiations that are to take place. Trump is going there on the assumption that this denuclearization means the same thing. It's not at all clear that denuclearization means the same thing for Kim as it means for Trump. For Kim, it means getting nukes out of Korean peninsula, meaning South Korea. For Trump, it means getting North Korea to give up its nukes. If we can't think through the long-term strategy, and furthermore, it's going to require, it's not, John Bolton, Trump's new national security advisor, thinks we can do a Libyan model there, where Libya will just like Libya backed off, gave up its weapons of mass destruction program, and the United States moved forward towards recognition. That's not going to work for North Korea because they saw Gaddafi fall. So they're going to want guarantees that Kim can be stabilized, that the government will remain, that South Korea will get investments. You know, what's needed is a whole package. You can't just go in there and claim a one-on diplomacy, Trump to Kim, without a larger package envisioning investment, security guarantees, and the whole works in order to guarantee peace in the long term. Because what Bolton's proposing is not a long-term peace proposal.
You know, I've been covering international politics and wars, diplomacy I'm in my fourth decade now, and I've seen this time and again. It's like it's all about the deal, working the deal, reaching an agreement without thinking about long-term consequences. Is that what we're seeing here? Because it seems like Donald Trump with North Korea, he wants to be the deal maker rather than leaving it to the diplomats. As you said, he's going to meet with Un by himself rather than relying on the diplomats.
That's right, and I think that's the problem. He's going to have tremendous support and foresight in how to make this into a long-term prospect and not just a one-off meeting where they either agree or not agree. It doesn't work like that. It takes time, and he doesn't seem to have the patience to deal with these kind of negotiations. And he doesn't seem to have the sense of the detail that you need to manage all the compromises and concerns that are raised here. You know, I really do think it's possible to resolve the Korean crisis, and the South Koreans really took the lead here. It wasn't Trump. It was South Korea that really initiated the discussions with the North. And then the Olympics helped create a feeling of friendship there, and we have to continue to work on that as we go forward. And Trump could either make it or break it. Now, if he makes it, I agree he should get the Nobel Peace Prize. But if he doesn't, and I'm afraid he's not prepared correctly, then I'm afraid we're going to be back even to a worse position than we were before the peace talk started.
Maybe he could get that Nobel because, after all, they gave it to Barack Obama after only 9 or 10 months in office. He hadn't really done anything.
That was absurd. That was absurd. I don't understand why they did that.
Well, we'll see what happens there. So you really think that war can be averted on the Korean Peninsula?
I can if it's really a long-term venture. But the way John Bolton, the national security advisor, is talking, that's not what he's envisioning. So if we're not envisioning a long-term peace settlement and reconciliation over the long term between North and South Korea and the United States and North Korea and Japan, and getting China in there, that it's a whole package, a concerted effort that's needed. I don't see Trump doing that, and therefore I don't think these talks will be very successful.
Okay, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. I hope we're not into deja vu. The same thing, we're on again, off again, talking, lifting of sanctions, stopping the testing, then testing resumes, sanctions resume. It seems like for the last 30 years.
That's happening. The North Koreans are getting the better and better missiles and longer range, so and bigger and bigger bombs. So it's really important to think of this in the long term and to see the ramifications for the entire region. Because a war in the Korean Peninsula, I guarantee, will not remain limited.
As Americans debate President Trump's tariff and trade policy, one of this country's biggest trade partners is taking some steps of its own to firm up control of its government and society. The Wall Street Journal reports China plans to tighten online censorship. Also, the Communist Party recently announced it will do away with presidential term limits. Some people say that may allow President Xi Jinping to become a new Chinese emperor. So how should President Trump and other Western leaders respond to this tightening of control inside China? Well, joining us for some insights is Zach Dykewald. He's co-founder of the think tank Young China Global Group. He's also the author of the new book, Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World. Thank you, Zach, for being with us. So I understand you spent a good amount of years in China after college, and you witnessed many changes. So from your perspective, what should we think of these internal developments? What do they really mean?
Thank you so much for having me, Gary. In terms of these internal developments, I would keep in mind that for many young Chinese people especially, modernization does not necessarily mean Westernization. Many pundits in the West, and America in particular, were surprised with these current developments and sort of shocked. A lot of what they expected China to become doesn't look like it's going to materialize now. Within China, however, there's this understanding of what's been effective for the last several decades, what's allowed China to grow at a pace and scale that's really unmatched in recent history.
Well, of all the countries, China has the most internet users. I know the Chinese government's pressing hard to control online access to information. So how are younger Chinese responding to that and engaging with current national and international matters? Are they really making a difference? Can they still bring about change there?
I think it's important to understand that within China right now, particularly this young generation, there's actually a tremendous amount of pride. They've witnessed incredible change. I'll give you an example. I'm 27. I was born in 1990. In my lifetime, I've witnessed our per capita GDP, sort of the metric for the quality of life in a place, increased 2.5 times, which is really incredible for a developed country. My friends in China, my peers in China, have witnessed their per capita GDP, the wealth of their family, their city, their country, increase 25 times in their lifetime. So while they recognize that there are flaws with their government, undoubtedly, censorship is frustrating. This new political development is scary for a lot of people. They also recognize that their government has been extremely effective. I often say by the, I'll believe it when I see it metric, this young generation in China is a nation of believers.
Well, I know you had mentioned the new political developments. So China did recently say it would amend the Constitution to repeal presidential term limits. So how should we respond, and what is Xi trying to achieve?
I think it's important to understand what China's political goals are and how China thinks not necessarily in 4-year terms, which is what our political system has encouraged us to think in, but rather decades and in generations. By the decades and generations metric, it's really difficult to tell what China will be doing in the next 4 years. It just is. So a lot of people are coming out and forecasting what China will become in the next 4 years. That's less important. What I think is most important is focusing on China's long-term strategies, particularly in the region. You look at the Belt and Road Initiative, an enormous infrastructure program in the Asia extended region that currently includes 68 countries. And it's China's version of leadership. It's an economics forward style of leadership in which China builds dependencies in the regions. At a time when it looks like the United States every 4 years might tear up a deal like the TPP, China is saying, we're not just building relationships to last 4 years, we're building relationships to last generations. We're building them in steel and in concrete. It's a different style of leadership than we're used to, not necessarily focused on the short term, but rather on the long term.
Yeah, I think our society is very much more short term because of our political situation. But with all this talk about tariffs on steel and aluminum, how likely do you think is China to enter into a trade war with the United States?
A trade war is not in either country's best interest. If you look at the investment flows between China and the United States, and the United States to China, they're actually more equal now than they've ever been. I think we assume that China is only a producer. That hasn't really been the case since 2012. China invests an enormous amount in the American economy. So when we start to think about our agricultural sector, you look at the middle of America, and a huge amount of our country is propped up on, or not our country, but the agricultural sector is reliant on China's business, soybeans, corn. These industries are reliant on China. So if China decides to retaliate, then frankly, they can do a large amount of damage to us as well. There's a certain amount of economic parity you're starting to see in terms of how much damage each economy could do to one another. And you don't want to get in that type of fight with China.
We saw it before with tariffs and then retaliation on some of our agricultural products. Now, the title of your book suggests Chinese young people could change the world. Why such a bold statement?
Think about scale. So I'm an American millennial. There's a big to-do about American millennials. What do we stand for? What do we want to buy? There's 80 million millennials in the United States. There are 400 million millennials in China. They're coming of age at a moment when they are realizing that they have more political clout than ever before. They're the first generation in China that didn't grow up in poverty in the modern world, really, on a widespread basis. So this idea that China is becoming a modern power, this is the generation that's going to lead it. Instead of just asking subsistence questions, how am I going to get enough to eat? How am I going to provide safety for my friends, my family, myself? This young generation is China's first generation that gets to decide, what do I want to be? What do I stand for? What are my dreams? What do I hope for myself, my family, my country? And the answers to those questions will be leading China's powerful step, both on its economy as well as its political step for the next 30, 40, 50 years. They're immensely consequential.
Okay, Zach Deichtwald, you definitely know China. You're author of the new book, Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World. We thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Christian women living in Pakistan are under constant threat of acid attack. As many as 400 attacks occur in that country each year. 70% of them happen to women under the age of 18. The most recent attack actually claimed the life of 25-year-old Asma Yaqub of Sialkot, Pakistan. Well, joining us with more is Wilson Chowdhury. He's president of the British Pakistani Christians Association. Wilson, so tell us what happened to Asma.
Well, Asma had been harassed by a Muslim man who had taken a shine to her, a 30-year-old man named Mr. Gujjar. He was totally infatuated, but she had absolutely no inclination of this until he put forward a proposal for marriage. She declined his offer, and as a consequence of this, he plotted a revenge. And when he had an opportunity, when she was cutting hair at a pre-party for a wedding, he told the bride family that he was the brother of Asma. When she came outside, he threw acid on her and then set her alight. She suffered 90% burns, was obviously in pain, was driven to the local hospital by the bride family, and was unconscious for many hours. The strange thing was, because like in many hospitals in Pakistan, there were no special burns units. Despite all of her pain and suffering, she had to travel a further 3 hours to get to a hospital with appropriate equipment.
So, Wilson, tell me, why are Christian women often attacked? I mean, it seems to me it was like, well, if you're not going to have me, then no one can have you. Why Christian women?
Christian women are vulnerable. If a Muslim man attacks them, their family can do very little to protect them. When Christian women are kidnapped and raped, it's almost impossible to wrench them free from the rapist because he has an authentic certificate of marriage produced by a rogue imam. When you're so disempowered, your women become the most vulnerable target, especially for men in a country like Pakistan, where Islam is the major faith, and where imams are preaching that there's a special place in heaven for those who convert by kidnapping, raping, and forcing people, Christians or other minorities, into marriage. Christian women are seen as anathema, pariah status, to be used as Muslim men please. So when they deny the advances of a Muslim man who feels he's super attractive, it becomes a huge slight on him, and he feels that he has to take revenge.
Years ago, I met a young Christian woman from Faisalabad named Gulnaz, who worked at the phone office, and she rejected the advances of a Muslim man who wanted her to go out on a date with him. After being rejected, I remember that he returned and threw acid on her, and I don't think the law back then required a mandatory sentence for that crime. Has the law been changed in Pakistan, toughened?
Again, there are acid attack laws now in Pakistan, but they're very rarely applied when it comes to minorities. Muslim men can afford to buy themselves out of trouble. Don't forget they have qisas and diyat laws, where as long as the victim family accepts forgiveness for the perpetrator, the man can get off. And obviously he would do that by paying an appropriate bribe. Most Christian families are forced into accepting these bribes because they're being coerced by threats from many of the Muslims in the local community.
So it's really like blood money allowed by Sharia law, is that correct?
Indeed, Sharia law is one of the awful banes of Islamic countries. When a country applies Sharia law, minorities become completely undermined. Their value, their ability to speak out against issues is removed from them because they have a weaker weight of authority. But more to the point, Muslims know that they can, because they're a majority, apply pressure on the vulnerable minority, fearful of the attack they might suffer from a community 10 times their size.
So basically these men are free then to go and do this again to someone else.
It's not unusual for repeat crimes of this nature from the same perpetrator.
I know in Bangladesh they enacted the death penalty against perpetrators who were convicted of acid attacks, and the number of cases have dropped there significantly. So how likely is Pakistan to adopt a similar law?
Pakistan has the death sentence for a number of crimes, and that will continue. What I will say is that there probably is a death sentence because Asma Yaqub has been killed. So for all intents and purposes, she's been murdered, and murder can have the ultimate sentence of death.
Wilson, we're running out of time, but finally, I want to know, what is your group doing to help women like Asma?
Well, we were there, to help Asma. We were offered to pay for medical attention for Asma and provided assistance with travel for the family. We're still working with them. We're paying for the funeral. We're going to pay for the unfortunate expenses of having to relay her corpse back to her city. But we do what we can. We provide advocacy. We speak with governments, highlighting the issues pertaining to Christians living in Pakistan, hoping that international governments will intervene on their behalf. I mean, this story is sad in the fact that had this woman come to us earlier with the harassment, we could have put her into a safe house. Unfortunately, not enough people yet in Pakistan know about the work that we're doing.
Okay, Wilson Chowdhury of the British Pakistani Christians Association. We appreciate you. Thanks so much for joining us. Since the founding of our nation, each generation of Americans has shown concern for their children's future. From education to personal development, it seems like many millennials today are a little less motivated to strive for excellence at school and work. Some experts say modern technologies and social media platforms are to blame. Others say American parents are just way too protective of our kids today. Some experts say children could lose the ability to think critically and make independent decisions. Joining us from freerangekids.com is Lenore Skenazy. Lenore, thank you for being with us. And as a father of many children myself and grandchildren, I believe protecting kids is part of my duty, encouraging them to make wise decisions. Are you saying people like us are doing the wrong thing?
Oh, no, I don't think anybody thinks that encouraging children to venture into danger is a good idea and not protecting them is wise. Free Range Kids and now Let Grow, the nonprofit that grew out of Free Range Kids, is basically proposing something that is probably very familiar to you. It's an old-fashioned way of raising kids where our job is to protect, but to gradually give our children more independence as they grow so that they are not growing up completely dependent on us.
Well, why are parents today overprotective? What are the reasons?
Well, I never blame parents because I feel like they're in a society that has deemed that everything that children do, see, eat, wear, hear, everything is presented in terms of danger. Drinking out of a plastic cup, they're going to get cancer. Walking to school at age 9, they're going to get abducted. So I don't blame parents, but I do blame the media because I feel like when my mom was raising me and she sent me walking to school, how old were you when you walked to school?
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think I was in first grade.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
6, 7.
Yeah, and nobody was second guessing her. Nobody was calling up on a cell phone. They didn't have cell phones to say, you know, Mrs. Skenazy let her 5-year-old or 6-year-old walk to school today, because we weren't seeing everything children did independently as if it was going to kill them and as if the parents were irresponsible. But now with this very, hyper terrified country that we're in, with all this bad news coming at us 24/7, a news cycle that my mom, thank God, didn't have to listen to when she was raising me, it feels like your kid is in danger when, in fact, the crime rate, the actual FBI statistics crime rate today, is lower than when most of us were growing up. It's back to the crime rate of 1963.
So why are parents today overprotective? What are the reasons?
Well, I never blame parents because I feel like we're living in a very terrified era when everything that is presented to us is presented in terms of how it could hurt your kid. Drinking out of a plastic cup, they're going to get cancer. Going and walking outside, they're going to be kidnapped. Details at 11, is there a danger in your toy chest? Everything is presented as something that is out to hurt your kid because of the media. The media is not there to inform us. The media is there to make money. And the way you make the most money is by having the most viewers. And the way you get the most viewers is by scaring them, because when you're afraid, you watch.
Sometimes they have to make their own mistakes. I know another popular saying goes, failure is the mother of success. So does the same principle still apply today? And to what extent should parents jump in before it's too late?
Well, the too late thing sounds very scary. And I'm afraid that that's something that our generation that's raising kids now, has been trained to think. We're always doing what I call worst first thinking. You go to the worst case scenario first and you proceed as if it's likely to happen. So many times when I talk to audiences and I ask people to tell me about something that they loved doing as a kid, they can't stop talking. Everybody, they're little groups, and then I say, okay, do you let your own kids do this? No. And it's like, well, if we're trying to give our kids the best possible launch, is it a great idea to not let them do anything on their own because something bad might happen? So to always think about, like, what if something goes wrong? When do we step in? Is to sort of rewrite childhood as so disastrous and so dangerous that we don't want our children ever having to rise to any occasion. And yet we all know that when we do that, that's when what did you say? Failure is the mother of success. So you have to let them fail a little. You can't be there to solve every problem. You want to raise a problem solver, you can't be solving their every problem.
If you live in Los Angeles, you probably saw scenes like these on local TV, but not much reporting about it took place nationally. On April 24th, people around the world marched and gathered in recognition of Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day. It's an annual commemoration of the genocide that took place against Armenian Christians during the waning days of the Ottoman Empire. As many as 1.5 million Armenians died in a period from 1915 until 1923. The Ottoman army murdered many of them. Others were raped, and many Armenians died from starvation and diseases as they were chased from their ancestral homes. Well, this year, demonstrators gathering in Los Angeles said they wanted the U.S. to recognize the genocide and their children to learn about it.
He's an Armenian and he needs to follow his heritage, and we have to show that what's wrong is wrong and what needs to be corrected, so he can follow his children and know that what they did is wrong.
We're all just hoping for the genocide to be recognized. That's why we all do this every year, to get more recognition.
28 countries officially recognize the Armenian genocide, but unfortunately, the United States does not. Ronald Reagan was the only president who dared to call the atrocities genocide, but it was not official government policy. Former Secretary of State John Kerry and Rex Tillerson recognize Islamic State atrocities against Yazidis and Christians in Iraq and Syria as genocide, but not the atrocities that killed 1.5 million Armenians. Maybe that's because our government leaders fear Turkey's possible response. The Turks allow the U.S. military and NATO to use the strategic Incirlik air base in Adana, Turkey. Might they kick them out if the U.S. government officially recognizes the Ottoman Empire's actions as genocide? Well, Erdogan says the West is blackmailing his country with that genocide issue. No blackmail, Mr. Erdogan, just facts that you cannot own up to. And we know why you will not. That admission would require you to pay reparations to the Armenian descendants of the victims. Property that was seized, actually stolen, would be returned to the families of those that were forced from their homes. And then again, you despise Christians, don't you, Mr. Erdogan? So why would you do anything to make amends for atrocities committed against them? After all, you've unjustifiably imprisoned American pastor Andrew Brunson. But what about President Trump? Mr. President, I know you don't want to complicate negotiations to win Brunson's release, but sometimes you just need to do the right thing, like you boldly did when you decided to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. You need to officially recognize the Armenian genocide as that, a genocide. Americans, 1.5 million Armenians, deserve that long overdue recognition. Proverbs 16:10 reminds us that the lips of a king, and in this case a president, speak as an oracle, and his mouth does not betray justice. Mr. President, do the right thing. Do not betray justice for Armenian Christians. Proverbs also reminds us in 21:15 that by doing so, you will bring joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. And in chapter 29:4 of Proverbs, it says, justice from a nation's ruler gives a country stability. Well, we sure could use more justice and stability right about now, don't you think? Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Follow us on Facebook, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.